Welcome to another APSA's interactive sessions of the 2024-2025 academic year. We're pleased to host tonight's session with current trainees to answer general questions about the process of applying and navigating waitlists and choosing the right program. I'd now like to have our wonderful panelists go around and introduce themselves, including their current institutions, as well as what they did during their gap years. Um, to be efficient, I'll call on you by name. So Peyton.
Hi everyone, my name is Peyton Closa. I am in my second year at the MSTP at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Just started grad school like 2 months ago. During my gap years, I got a post-bac research internship at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I was lucky enough to have my own project in a lab there. So I did that full-time for 2 years before I came to med school.
All right, thank you. And Ronnie.
Yes. Hello everyone. I'm Ronnie Richardson. I'm at the MD PhD program at UNC Chapel Hill, and I just finished my third year of medical school. So I'm like a rising eighth year now, which is crazy because time flies. But yes, I'll be graduating next year.
All right, thank you so much, Peyton and Ronnie, for being here. We're grateful you took the time out of your day to come virtually to our meeting to provide your wisdom about the process of med school applications. My name is Rashi, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. I am a G1 MSTP student, also at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And in the chat box, we have Michaela that'll be helping us answering some questions there. For those of you who might step away or miss a piece of this webinar, just as a reminder, we will be having this recorded. I will also remind you to please submit your questions to the Q&A box. We've already received those that were submitted during the registration process, and we also have a team of co-moderators behind the scenes collecting questions live. You can submit questions in the chat box. Okay, that's all the announcements that I have. Thank you again for being here, and I'm going to get us started with our first question. Okay, how can I write an effective letter of intent to my top choice program after being waitlisted, assuming I don't have any new updates?
I think one piece of advice I would give for those kinds of things is to be like very specific. I think sometimes with like letters of interest or intent, it's easy to like be vague and like kind of give overarching themes of like why you feel like you would be a good fit. But I think it's really great if you find something specific at the school you're interested in that you're like very passionate about that aligns well with your application. That way they can hopefully tell that your interest is genuine and it's not just like a letter of intent that you're sending, hoping to just like get in anywhere. So I think being as specific as possible, is really helpful.
Yep, agree.
All right. Another question, how do I handle being on the wait list of an MD PhD program?
Um, so I was also having to like navigate waitlist as well when I applied. Um, it can be difficult. I think it also like really depends on your situation. Like if you have like gotten an acceptance somewhere else and maybe you're waitlisted at a program you would rather end up at. Um, or maybe you're in the situation where you're just waitlisted and that's kind of your only option at the moment. If you're in that case where it's like your only option and you're currently waitlisted, I would say at this point, also tentatively like be thinking about reapplying if that is something you have to do. I think it's always good to like be prepared. But also it is still really early in the process and waitlist movement doesn't really happen until May. Sometimes it even moves into June, like into the summertime. Um, but I do think it's always good to just be thinking about like in case you do have to reapply, getting your things together, whether you want to wait another year, is a good idea. But yeah, in terms of like handling sort of the last minute things, I think just try to be as prepared as possible as you can. So for me, that meant like finding possible like apartments in more than one location. Obviously like not signing a lease or anything yet, but doing as much like groundwork as you can to prepare for potentially living in more than one place. I feel like that was super helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I have nothing to add. In full transparency, when I was waitlisted, I already had other acceptances. So I was very much like, okay, like it would be nice if I got in there, but also like I have other options.
All right, thank you. Just a follow-up question that we have in the chat. I know Peyton, you sort of spoke about this. How much waitlist movement typically happens for MD, PhD, or MSDP programs? And in your opinion, with the current funding situation, do you think this will affect movement at all?
Um, so in terms of like how much waitlist movement happens, I think it's usually like not as much as like regular med school. So if you think about each program maybe having like 10-ish spots, I know it varies on the program. I would say like at the most maybe 3 spots-ish, usually 2 to 3. Sometimes it's just one. So it's not as much movement as you would see like at the medical school level. And then in terms of the funding situation, yeah, I don't know. That's really complicated, and unfortunate. I do think potentially schools might be a little bit more relaxed with how many applicants they're accepting. So, like, normally they like to be very stringent and they're like, we have 10 spots and we want to fill all 10 spots. But I don't know. I really don't know, but potentially if they have 9 or 8 people instead of 10, maybe they'll be okay with that, just given the uncertainty. That's a good question. I don't really know, but that's kind of what I've been thinking might be the mindset of like program directors, given all this stuff going on.
Yeah, I also like don't know, but just from thinking about this, I know like at least at UNC, our funding like for MD PhD students is split between the med school and the NIH. I think it's like 2/3 like of my like of our MD PhD funding comes from the School of Medicine and like 1/3 from the NIH. So I think being an MD PhD student, I would imagine is actually helpful to you as opposed to like PhD only people who are reliant solely like or relying on other things. And I know we've all like heard, seen, and probably know people who, have had their PhD only offers rescinded or, things like that. So I would imagine that that would be hopefully different for MD PhD programs just because of like differential funding. But yeah, it's really hard to say.
Thank you. We have a question that was submitted earlier. Is it frowned upon to have an application that is strongly tailored towards a discipline of interest? General MD application advice is to make sure you're applying as an aspiring physician, not cater to a specific specialty. But is that different for MD PhD applications?
I think if you know what specialty you're interested in or like research disciplines that you're interested in, I think it's good to mention those things in the application because like you seem like you have an idea of what you want to do, especially thinking about specific institutions, right? So like Peyton was mentioning earlier, and this is like true not just if you're on a wait list, but in general, like saying things like I'm interested in, for example, um, public health, right? Like let's say the person is interested in public health and you know that that's something you want to focus on for your PhD. You can write about, oh, I've looked into your public health program. You are doing amazing research. I'm specifically interested in the work of, and then like drop a couple investigator names and like tie that into whatever prior research you did or what you hope to do in the future. Similarly for like clinical specialties, also kind of same thing, like um, you can kind of make it advantageous to you to your application, like, oh, your institution has this. Um, like, yes, I'm interested in your institution partially because of like this reason, because I'm interested in this specialty or in this like PhD study field for research.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. If anything, like Ronnie was saying, it could potentially help you if you're like very specific. They know you've done your research. So yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Thank you. Another question in the chat box. If I sent a letter of intent prior to being waitlisted, would it be beneficial to now send a letter of intent?
So like I guess if you've already sent one, I'm not sure you can like send another one. You could always like contact the people like at the MD PhD office, just like following up, and you could just say something like, you know, thank you so much for continuing to like consider my application. Just so I don't know, maybe they remember you're there, but I feel like if you've already sent like a letter of intent being like, you're my number one choice, they have that information and it's in your file. So I'm not sure, um, sending like another one would really be helpful, but you could always try checking in on the status of things. That might be more helpful.
All right, thank you. Um, Another question. How do you manage working with a med school that you were accepted to while waiting for your waitlisted school to get back to you, especially if there's a deadline for acceptances that occurs before the waitlist moves? So is there a way you can sort of um, leverage your acceptance with your waitlisted school?
I am not really sure, like trying to kind of leverage your acceptance would really help you that much because it's literally like Peyton was saying, it's the number of spots and it's literally like waiting for, so it's not like, if you say, oh, I have this acceptance over here, like hee hee ha ha, like, doesn't that make me more attractive? Like, they can't do anything because it's literally like two spots or one spot or whatever, zero spots. And they're like, if someone else drops off, then like you can be moved up on the wait list. I guess trying to leverage your acceptance, maybe if they, you're trying to move from like number five on the wait list from number two, maybe that would help you. But I'm not sure like how advantageous to that would be or that would be for you. What do you think, Peyton, about the rest of that question?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I'm not sure, like, it would really work for you to be like, hey, I have an acceptance somewhere else, just given, like you said, you don't know where you are on their wait list unless they're telling you. Um, and then in terms of like, if you're kind of in the situation where you're accepted somewhere else, but they want you to commit before the waitlist movement happens at the school you're interested in, that was something I was really worried about. Um, I feel like in that situation, unfortunately, there's not much you can do. If that deadline for acceptance comes, before you're able to get that waitlist movement at the school of your choice, I mean, you kind of have to take the acceptance that you have, which really sucks. I don't really know of any way of getting around that. I think you would just have to end up committing to the place you got in.
Absolutely, I agree, and also from experience. All right, we had some questions asking for some advice on creating a school list and how they can essentially choose a right program that might be the best fit for them.
Um, yeah, so as far as like applying, of course, everyone says like apply broadly. So for me, broadly was like minimum 30 programs just because of like the way things are, like how selective the programs have gotten these days. They used to say like 15 or 20 would be fine, but I think like probably 30 is more appropriate. Some of it has to do with geography. I'm not really a West Coast person, so I was like not really trying to be like applying to all the California, all the Oregon, Texas, like all that type of stuff. So I kind of like the geography of it was important. And then also I feel like what was really driving me, honestly, like to keep it 100 with you, was figuring out that not all MD PhD programs are MSTPs because like I'm sure you all are aware, like looking on the NIH there's like an NIH website that lists all the MSTPs, and the distinction is that the MSTPs have like this NIH designation and NIH specific funding, whereas the MD PhDs, there are more of them, but it's kind of like, the funding is not like that specific. So some people, they like that because then they feel like it's easier to get into the ones that are not MSTPs, that are just MD PhDs. But for me, it was like, yeah, but for some of those, people have to pay. Like they pay to do the MD PhD program. That's not an MSTP. And that was like wild to be like paying. So yeah, like MSTP status was important to me. Research should be like your number one thing. Honestly, like the med school stuff is not that important. Like what's going to distinguish you or like hopefully help drive your decision is the research prospects. Med school is going to be med school anywhere. You're going to graduate, you're going to have an MD and like go to residency and all that good stuff. But what's not going to be the same everywhere is the research opportunities that are there for you, like as far as investigator wise, what the program will allow you to do. I know some programs don't even allow people to do or encourage people to do public health PhDs. Some places don't even have like a proper neuroscience department. Like you have to think about these things. Um, Having a pass fail M1 and M2 curriculum, which is more common now, but back when I was applying, that was not a given. So definitely you want to look out for that. Um, Cost of living, super important. Just thinking about like this is 8 years of your life. It's like the rest of your 20s, literally. So you have to think about like what type of lifestyle do you want to have? Me being in North Carolina, I have a lot of opportunities. Like I can have a car, like I can afford to live by myself. Whereas if I was living elsewhere, I probably would not be able to live by myself. People in my program like buy houses and cars and like all these things, like when they're an M2 or a PhD one or whatever. So thinking about that is important, like proximity uh, to, yeah, like family and other things, because you're going to be in school for a long time. So thinking about if you, it's important for you to be like close to your family or not. And then also just thinking about with the cost of living, the stipends, like understanding, especially like if you're doing a more of a non-traditional, like non-STEM PhD, your stipend might look different than people who are doing STEM PhDs. So looking into those things. Um, and yeah, I think those are the main things. The one thing I did care about from the MD side was having a medical Spanish program, which UNC had one of the like most well-developed medical Spanish programs, and that was important to me to like become a bilingual provider. Um, that was important. And then, of course, looking at like the match list, you want to make sure that like people are matching in specialties you're interested in, or just like matching well in general. That later outcomes of graduates. So, like, where are your graduates now? Like, they didn't all go to private practice, did they? If so, this is probably not a good program for me who wants to do research my whole life. So, yeah, I think that was a long answer, but those are like main things to think about when applying places and also like when deciding where, like, which one to choose once you get your acceptances and stuff.
Yeah, that was amazing advice. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a question that asks, do you guys have a sense of how schools view applicants who choose to stay on both the MD as well as the MD PhD waitlists for schools that allow you to remain on the waitlist for both?
Yeah, that was something I was super worried about when I was applying because at least my thought process and probably similar to whoever's asking was like, I think I'm not serious about this MD PhD thing, this commitment if I remain on the MD only wait list. Was really worried about that. I actually so when I was at UW-Madison, I got a chance to talk to some of the program directors there. So this is only like an N of one advice, but just from asking other students and program directors, it doesn't really seem like it's that big of a deal from what I've gathered. I think they totally understand that because it's a really difficult situation to be in. And also like, at the end of the day, if you want to be an MD PhD, you're going to be one. And if that means you get your MD and then go get your PhD later, so be it. So I think they understand, most people will understand that decision if you choose to stay on the waitlist for both. maybe here and there might be a person who doesn't like it for whatever reason, but I really feel like most of the time it won't harm you if that's something you choose to do.
Thank you. Ronnie, did you have something to add to that?
No, I didn't. I didn't apply to any MD only programs, so I literally have zero to add to that.
Okay, just wanted to check before moving on to the next question. Sort of a follow-up to that, what is the balance between waiting for a waitlist acceptance and preparing for a reapplication?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think just like you said in your question, it's a balance. So thankfully, like you applied once and you already do have like a lot of material and like thoughts down, and you've already kind of reached out to your letter writers. Obviously, things have to change because there's a reason you didn't get in. But I think it's always good to be thinking about that at any stage in the process, if I'm being honest. Especially now, like at this time of year, it's definitely something you should be thinking about. But you at least kind of have an idea. Probably, hopefully, your like letters of rec, for example, are really strong. That's something you should field out. Like I would have no shame about asking, like, are you able to write me like a strong letter of rec? Because I do think professors will be honest with you if they feel like they can't do that for you. So I would at least at that point you would have maybe your letter writers fielded, and then if you feel like maybe one of them hurt you potentially, you could always get a new one. But I think it's always good to be thinking about and like reflecting on your application and what you wrote, because let's just say you applied this last cycle. If you were to look at your application now that you probably wrote almost a year ago, you probably don't even fully resonate maybe with some of the things that you said even a year ago. So I think it's good to just like always be looking back on that and rereading and being like, oh, does that feel really authentic, true to like myself and like what I want to accomplish? Because that definitely will change over the course of a year. So I personally, for me, I was always kind of thinking about that, just kind of anxious about that. So I would just always kind of be reflecting on your application. And then, yeah, not being afraid to switch up your letter writers and be like, can you write me a strong letter of rec? I think that's really important.
Absolutely. How do you think reapplicants are viewed at a school, particularly those that were interviewed and waitlisted or rejected?
Um, so for me, just based off of personal experience, so I applied twice. I applied MD only the first time, so I didn't do MD PhD twice. But hopefully it's not too different. But I, was waitlisted at a few different schools my first cycle and never got in. Um, just full transparency, the institution I'm at waitlisted me the first time, and I didn't get in, and here I am later. So I really don't think that's a big deal. If anything, I feel like it's a good thing. Like they'll see that and be like, oh, we were interested in her before, why were we? And then kind of compare your previous application. I actually interviewed at one school. So I took 2 years off in between my applications. And one school, when I showed up for the interview, my interviewer literally said to me, I was reading through your application and it actually sounded really familiar from when you applied. Like I remember reading some of these similar stories. So I thought that was really crazy. So people will remember. And from what I've seen, it's really not a bad thing. Like I said, I was waitlisted at MCW and the first cycle and I still got in. And then someone remembered me previously, but still invited me for an interview the next year. So my experience has been like that it's not a negative thing. So try not to be worried about it, I would say.
Thank you. Sort of shifting gears a little bit, what gap year programs do you think would be best to prepare? And does rank in a program matter?
I think gap years can serve like it serves a lot of different functions and people can get different things out of them. Like for some people, doing a master's program is very useful, like one that's course heavy, particularly if like their GPA was not that great in undergrad. The master's program can really help you, just like from a pure grade standpoint, look better. And then there's some like master's programs that are research focused, so like not really that many classes, but like you're trying to get research experience. Those are great, but those both usually are like costly. So people a lot of times will like to do postbacks at, the NIH or like some research lab at a university. Those are great. I know particularly at the NIH, the postback stipends have really increased these days. So that could be like appealing to people, like do some research, make some money, so you can like pay for your applications or reapplications. Other things would be like if you're really not into the whole, doing research for all that time thing, working as a scribe or an EMT or like a CNA, all of those will like help strengthen your application, these clinical experiences and things like that. So I don't necessarily think there's one option for a post-bac that's better than the other. It's more so what you're interested in and what you feel like your application could benefit from the most.
Great, thank you. Um, when writing your essays for application, who would you turn for help and revision on that material?
Yeah, that's a good question. I asked all kinds of people personally. So depending on like where you're at in your journey, I would definitely like ask some like trusted professors or like mentors that you have, maybe they're grad students or medical students. I think it's always good to get someone in the medical field, and also the scientific field to like take a look at what you're doing. So I had clinical mentors that I would ask. I also had like my research PI mentor and the grad student in my lab take a look. I also asked my mom, like I asked my friends. Like I think it's really good to get as many eyes on what you're writing as possible. Yeah, I do think if you want to prioritize who you're asking, definitely like someone in the research space that you're currently in. And then I think any clinical mentor that you have would also be something I would prioritize.
Yeah, for sure. All that's great. And then also like if you have a career advisor, either like from your undergrad or like at the NIH, I know they have career advisors. Those are great people to like help you overall with the process, but also like reading your essays. And then, like Peyton said, you definitely, of course, want like a professor or a PI or whoever reading it, but you definitely want lay people also, moms, friends, like family, things like that. And they will definitely let you know, like, this is granular. I didn't know what you were saying about your research. Because if they can't understand it, people from your field might not be able to understand it either. Because, like, not everybody who's reading your application worked on uh, tumor markers and glial cells.
Thank you. Um, if you are reapplying, do your letter writers have to rewrite their letters?
Yeah, I would definitely say yes. That's something you should ask them to do. I mean, just like for one, like, there's a lot of reasons probably that contributed to you not getting in the first time, but I would never just assume it was one part of the other. So for me personally, when I reapplied, I everything was changed. Obviously, you can't like see exactly what they're writing because you have to like sign away the confidentiality or whatever, but I just like kind of reiterated to my letter writers like if I could get like a fresh like recommendation letter. I also tried to keep in touch with them too, just and keep them updated on what I was doing, like send them an updated copy of your resume and like what you've been doing in like your time off or the year that you applied and like didn't get in. So yeah, I would definitely say yes to that.
Thank you. We have a few more questions about letter of intent and update letters. One was, when should you send a letter of intent? And the other one, is it worth sending an update for a paper submission for a waitlisted school, or do only publications matter?
So for the paper submission, I think that's definitely something you can include. I don't think I would send a letter just saying that if that was like your only thing, but like if you have like an update letter in general that you want to send to be like, hey, here's what I've been up to since you last heard from me, and you kind of have maybe one or two other things to talk about, then yeah, I think totally that's something you can mention. Because the idea is that you've been productive, right? So the fact that you're on a paper that's being submitted, I think is a good thing. Um, so I definitely think that's something you could include in like an update letter with other things. Um, and then as far as like when to send a letter of intent, I mean, I feel like it would be best probably a little bit later in the process when, like in the springtime, because that's kind of when people are, making some of their final decisions in terms of their final spots and like waitlist movement. I would just worry about sending it too soon and it kind of getting, I guess, lost somewhere in your application. But I don't know if you guys have other thoughts on that, but that's what I would say.
Great, thank you. Um, when it came down to choosing the list of programs that you were going to apply to, how did you approach that? Did you apply to them all at once or in phases? Or did you stagger your applications for ease of secondaries?
From what I recall, um, I applied to them because at least I don't know if it's changed by now, but when I applied, it was you send like one general application, to how many ever schools you're applying to, and then each school can decide if they're going to send you a secondary or not. I'm assuming that's still how it works. So I don't think staggering it would really help you unless you just want to feel less fatigued or like pay less money at a time. But the thing is, though, like if you wait till later to like try to game the system or do whatever you want to do with the secondaries, then like there's less interview spots available, right? So like if you try to wait until X month, like August, then they've already started sending out interview invites and you haven't even submitted a secondary yet. So I was always taught like get everything in like June, July, like earliest as you can reasonably. Because they start looking at stuff, they start sending out invites, and you don't want to be left on the end of, oh, I'm just now getting this secondary, or I haven't even submitted this stuff yet. And then there's only 20 interview spots left when you could have been one of 100 interview spots that they would have considered you for.
Yeah, I totally agree. The secondary season is a rough one. Like I understand why you'd want to stagger it, but I do really feel like it's something you have to power through and I would apply as early as possible. Like um I personally feel like the day it opens, you should have your stuff ready to submit. I really feel like that, like Ronnie said, makes a huge difference so that you can get interview spots when there's the most available. So you can always pre-write secondaries. That is something some people do to kind of offset the workload of the secondaries because you can find secondary questions online. Like if you just Google it or put Reddit after it, like you'll be able to find it. Or some of them post their secondary questions. So yeah, that is a more effective way, I think, of lightening the secondary load is pre-writing rather than applying later. I really do not recommend that.
Thank you. Um, in your personal statement, would you write about personal experiences that really tie into your physician scientist goal, but less competencies? Or would you choose a personal experience that may tie less into the goal, but exemplifies your resilience and other great core competencies?
Um, right. So that's a good question. So with that, from what I recall, you had like for MD PhD program applications, you had a personal statement and then you had a research statement. So the personal statement to me is really the more MD relevant one. So that's when like you should, I would do the what you said about emphasizing the things that are more like core competency type deal, like AMC competencies, that's great, resilience, all that good stuff. But then on the research statement and like on the personal statement, you can also say like, I'm interested in research, blah, blah, blah. But like your bread and butter for the personal statement is like why you want to be a physician. And then on the research statement, that's when you would more likely talk about the personal experience that ties into the physician scientist goal and like kind of ignore the competencies because like this is research. We don't care about med school competencies. So, of course, that's very like simplistic, but I would say use the personal statement for more med school directed competency type stuff, and then use the research statement for research and like MD, PhD stuff and like what you're trying to do, long-term goals, being a physician scientist, XYZ.
Thank you. Sort of going off of that, if you are reapplying, do you have any tips for rewriting essays?
Yeah, I think that's like a very individual approach, but for me, what I felt like worked best was I pretty much reworked everything completely. And what I mean is like you can certainly like tell the same stories, right? Because those things that are important to you that inspired your journey along the way aren't necessarily always going to change. You might have new experiences and you should write about those, but you can write about the same stories in a different way. So that's kind of what I tried to do is like those defining moments that I knew I wanted to talk about no matter what. I just kind of had to revamp it and kind of start from ground zero and redo everything. And then also, I definitely would include some new experiences that you've had in the time since you applied and knew you had to reapply. I do think it's good to, yeah, just kind of work from the ground up and restart everything. But still, like writing about the same things that are important to you. You can still do that while also adding in new experiences. And for me, like it was always like really hard to get going. So I think even if you write something down and you read it and it sounds ridiculous and you hate it, it's always good to like have thoughts on a page so that way you kind of know where you're going. Um, yeah. So for me, that's what worked. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Another question about letter of intent. What things would you recommend including in your letter of intent after being waitlisted? If you don't have any significant updates to provide, is it appropriate to essentially write why you're choosing that certain med school to essentially emphasize how that particular MSTP is a great fit for you?
Yeah, yeah, so if you like don't have any new updates to share, I totally think like what you said is fine. I feel like to me it feels like the letter of intent's like kind of more of a personal red letter rather than like a, hey, here's what's new. Like obviously if you have an update they haven't heard that you is really impactful, you can put it in there. But I do think, like you said, it's a really good opportunity to be like, hey, here's why I'm really passionate about your program, kind of like what we said at the beginning of being really specific, I think is really important. So yeah, I do think it's totally fine to take that approach and be like, here's why I want to come to your med school, why I want to live in Wisconsin or whatever. I think that's good. I think that's a good approach.
Thank you. How do you gauge social vibes of a program with most interviews being virtual right now?
I felt like when I applied, when it was also virtual, I felt like I got the most vibe read like from the students. So usually like at every interview, you'll get like a student panel. And I find that they're willing to be like pretty candid about their experience for the most part. And I don't know, I feel like you can kind of tell if someone's like miserable or not. So or like if you ask a question and like there's a really long pause, maybe people aren't answering, then you're like, oh, like maybe they don't have anything good to say. So I think really pay attention during the student panels because also those are going to be your classmates. But also to be fair, like I feel like I could tell from the faculty too, what the vibes of the institution were, or like was it a competitive environment or more collaborative? I feel like you can tell. I would say the student panels for me were the most helpful.
Yeah, and also I recall people like even after the student panels and stuff being like, yeah, like if you have any questions, like feel free to reach out. That's like a great thing to do. Like reach out to at least a couple students that if at the school you're considering and maybe you can set up a phone call or a Zoom call with them or something. I feel like that's even a better way to get like candid responses because then you're not even within the university platform anymore, like the MSTP platform, and you've scheduled like a separate call a week later or something like that. And, they're in the middle of their whatever PhD too and can really tell you what it's like and without kind of the angst of being in an MSTP sponsored event, you can kind of get more candid answers.
Thank you. That's great advice. We have another question. It's a two-part question, so I'll ask about the first half. But essentially, the question is asking how to tackle gathering letters of recommendations when a lot of the MSTP websites request for letters from all your research supervisors, especially if there's a limit to the number of letters you can submit.
Yeah, I really don't think it needs to be all because think about it. If somebody's been in three different labs and you only have X amount of recommendation, like you still have to get one from your professor, like from your like all these other people. So I really feel like all is a strong word. I did not submit like a letter of rec from all of my research supervisors. I think I only got it from one, like the most significant one that I worked with the longest and like had a publication with and stuff. Like my other one, I didn't even ask them for a letter of rec. So I'm not sure how strict the all is. What's your kind of feel on that, Peyton?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think you have to get all of them. I think just get the most significant ones that were the most impactful for you. Um, like if you only spent like a couple months in the lab and it wasn't really for you, I don't think that that's important. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Absolutely. And how would you sort of figure out a good ratio of letters that are more research focused versus clinical focused when applying to MD PhD programs?
I think like so for that, I think even if like let's just say like you couldn't maybe you don't have a like specific clinical experience that you could get a letter writer from, even if you can get somebody who like knows you as a person, I think that does a lot for you in both realms, like the science side and like the medicine side. Just someone who can like speak to your character. So I think that can be really helpful if you're like coming up short in one area. Definitely have like at least like one obviously like letter writer from like your most significant like PI relationship. But yeah, I mean, I feel like if you have like one from each field, that's good. And then just like getting your other letter writers from like professors you had class with, or like I said, maybe a volunteer coordinator or something who like knows you really well as a person and can like speak to your character. I think that goes a long way.
Thank you. What did you do for your wellness when waiting for wait lists or just med school decisions in general?
I feel like for me, I just continued my normal activities like exercising, reading, watching TV, like, because at that point, you really done all you can, right? Like, you literally did all the hard work. So, I mean, like, bake cookies, do normal stuff, like, because there's literally nothing you can do. So why not just do stuff you actually enjoy instead? So, yeah. And I feel like that's been my approach in med school and the PhD too, is like, you have to have stuff that you do that's not tied to your curriculum or like your career if you're gonna like survive and thrive and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like you have to make time for like the things that make you happy, and that's going to be a really important skill to have like in med school. So yeah, I totally agree. Just like keep doing what normally makes you happy and it'll get your mind off of it. Like it really will. And also like if you just kind of have the mindset of like no matter how this goes, I'm gonna reach this goal. Like if you want to be an MD PhD, you will be. And I like really believe that. So
It's true. It's so true. Like I always say, anyone who wants to be a doctor can. Like anyone who wants to go to med school can. It might not be the first time around. It might not be in the geographic location or the institution you wanted, and it might take you a little bit longer to get there. But anybody who wants to can. My PI from undergrad, he was like, you know, applied 3 times to get into med school, and now he's like the best doctor ever, like literally got named best gastroenterologist in the country and like all these things. So yeah, it's not necessarily a reflection on you, like with the waitlisting and like the rejections and all that stuff. It doesn't mean you're not gonna reach your goal. It doesn't mean you're not gonna be a doctor or a physician scientist or whatever it is. You can definitely still reach it.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's a good question to end on. Anyone who wants to be a doctor can be a doctor and do it. That's great advice. So if there are no more questions, I don't see any in the chat box, and I think we went over everything that was submitted. But thank you all for joining us for a Q&A session today with our current students. I want to thank the panelists for their time. Thank you, Peyton and Ronnie. And thank you to all the participants who made this session interactive. And thank you to the APSA Diversity Ad Hoc Partnerships Committee, APSA leadership, and everyone that put this session together. Our next interactive session will be on March 27th on the topic of taking step 2. More information can be found on the website. Thank you so much again for joining us and hope you have a lovely day.